In a heart-stopping 5 minutes at the Supreme Court, Pam Bondi, the unwavering Attorney General of Florida, used her iron will to shatter the dirty scheme of a powerful corporation, leaving her enemies trembling and screaming in despair before thousands of enraged eyes. But what lurks behind her 8 years of relentless fighting will send shock waves throughout the entire nation when it is finally revealed. Pam Bondi was no stranger to pressure and expectation, especially after becoming the first female Attorney General of Florida. From a young age, she was taught that overcoming challenges wasn't about stepping back, but about moving forward. Her presence in the courtroom embodied years of unwavering resilience. Sharp eyes, steady stride, every movement purposeful. However, beneath that tough exterior lay the scars of her journey. The political world had never treated women kindly, especially those who dared challenge the status quo. For Pam, each victory was earned through persistence and determination, but her past was more complex than anyone realized. She wasn't always the symbol of strength she is today. In the early years of her career, Pam faced harsh gender discrimination, often overlooked in favor of less capable male colleagues who were given preferential treatment. She was once deemed too emotional or too ambitious to handle major cases. Yet, she pressed on. Every challenge made her stronger, teaching her how to fight and adapt in a world that would never accept her power simply because she was a woman. But as Pam stood firm at the heart of Florida's power, her battle was only beginning. The fiercest adversaries weren't the ones she could see clearly, but those hidden behind power, cloaked in the robes of the law. And today, one of them would test her resolve, Judge Leonard Grayson. In the courtroom, Pam knew there would be no room for compromise. This wouldn't be just another workday. It would be a battle for something beyond legal supremacy. It would be a fight for her very honor. But as the case unfolded, she began to realize that this judge wasn't just an adversary. He was a genuine threat with a hidden agenda, capable of bringing down everything she had worked to build. Pam had always had the ability to see through the facades of her opponents, but now she felt as if she were looking into a mirror, seeing the very darkness she had once fought to escape. In 2025, in the stark quiet of the U.S. Attorney General's office, Pam Bondi sat alone at her desk. The only light came from the dimly lit desk lamp that cast a soft glow on the thick stack of files in front of her. Her face was illuminated in the pale light, a portrait of unshakable determination. The room was silent except for the rustling of the papers as she flipped through them. Each page was a stark reminder of the battle she was about to face. These documents weren't just paperwork. They were a chilling map of corruption that reached deep into the heart of the system. A sprawling real estate conglomerate, cloaked in power and influence, had siphoned off billions of dollars from public funds. But even more terrifying than the corporation itself was the mastermind behind it all, a federal judge with ties to the highest echelons of power, a man who had used his judicial influence to protect criminals and bury the truth. Pam's fingers gripped the edge of the documents as her eyes scanned the evidence, contracts, figures, and sworn testimonies that painted a damning portrait of greed and deceit. The anger in her chest was not just a fleeting feeling. It was a surge of righteous fury that had been building for years. She had seen too many injustices, too many betrayals, too many people in power abuse the system that was meant to protect the weak. And now, once again, she found herself staring down a corrupt machine that had to be stopped. She leaned back in her chair, her breath steady but forceful as she absorbed the enormity of what lay before her. The scheme wasn't just about money. It was a violation of everything she had worked for. Each piece of evidence felt like a betrayal, not just of the law, but of her very belief in justice. Yet, despite the bitterness gnawing at her, she knew that this wasn't a moment for weakness. The pressure in her chest wasn't the weight of defeat. It was the fire of someone who had been through the storm and was ready to face the next challenge head-on. This isn't just another case, Pam muttered to herself, her voice cold and resolute. This is a fight for everything I stand for justice, for truth, and for this system that's been twisted beyond recognition. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. It wasn't just a battle against the corporate giants and their influence, nor was it a simple legal case. This was a war, one that would push her to the edge, but also one that she could never walk away from. Pam knew the odds were stacked against her. The person pulling the strings behind this mess wasn't some petty criminal. It was someone who wore the robes of a judge, someone with untold power and the resources to destroy anyone who dared challenge him. Judge Leonard Grayson wasn't just an adversary. He was a figure of authority, a man who could bury anyone who stood in his way under a mountain of legal paperwork, intimidation, and deceit. She gripped the file in her hands, staring at the evidence. Every page seemed to mock her, mock the years she'd spent fighting for what was right, mock the sacrifices she'd made to get to this moment. But she wouldn't allow it. She couldn't. There was no turning back now. Pam set the stack of files down on the desk with a sharp, deliberate motion, the sound echoing in the quiet room. She took a long, steadying breath, the kind that steadied her resolve. This wasn't just about a legal victory anymore. This was a fight for her very soul. She wasn't just battling for justice in a courtroom. She was battling for her reputation, her dignity, and the integrity of the very system she had dedicated her life to. "I will make them pay," Pam whispered to herself, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Every word was a vow. Every word was a promise that she would see this through, no matter the cost. The pressure of the moment was palpable, but Pam remained unshaken. This was a test unlike anything she had faced before, not just against one powerful adversary, but against a system of corruption so entrenched it seemed untouchable. But Pam wasn't someone who backed down. Not when everything was on the line. Not when the truth was her only weapon. This was it. The beginning of a fight that would define not just her career, but her legacy. She wasn't about to let a corrupt judge like Leonard Grayson manipulate the system to his advantage. Not on her watch. The battle was on, and Pam Bondi was ready to take on the darkness with everything she had. The room was pitch black, save for the faint glow of the computer screen that illuminated Pam Bondi's face. She had been sitting there all night, her eyes fixed on the screen, her hands gripping the keyboard as numbers and letters danced in her mind like a dark game of power and corruption. But not every number struck fear into her heart. Just then, a new email arrived. She opened it, her eyes quickly scanning the lines. And then a chill spread over her mind as she read the sharp, succinct message. "Bondi, you'll tremble when you realize who you've crossed." A surge of uncontrollable anger rose within Pam, but it didn't turn into panic or fear like those who threatened her hoped it would. Instead, she smiled, a cruel, cold smile. This wasn't the first time she had faced threats like these. The shadowy figures who thought fear would break her had made a grave mistake. Pam Bondi had never been afraid of evil, and today she had no reason to back down. She stood up, walking toward the window, looking out into the darkness. The night seemed to blanket the entire city, but within her, a fire of resolve burned brighter than ever. These people thought their threats would drive her into submission, but they didn't realize that those very threats only made her stronger. Every step she had taken had not been to run from fear, but to face it head-on and crush every obstacle in her path. Her past had taught her that lesson well. The cold of the night could never compare to the coldness in her heart at that moment. The corrupt, the powerful, would never understand that they could only live in the darkness if they were strong enough to rise in the light. And Pam Bondi, the woman they thought would quake under pressure, was the one who would bring that light, not just for herself, but for all those who had been oppressed and overlooked. She turned back to her desk, grabbed an old notebook, and opened it, writing with unwavering determination, "They will pay. It's time for everyone to face the truth." As she clicked send on her response, a powerful sensation spread through her body, as if every word she typed was a challenge. Pam didn't look at the screen, but in her mind, the plans were clear. Step by step, she would expose this evil to the light. No one, whether a judge or a real estate tycoon, could stand above justice forever. And as she gazed into the mirror across from her, there was nothing but defiance in her steadfast eyes. "I've never feared evil," she whispered, her voice full of confidence, as if those words had become the strength to overcome every condition, every challenge life had to offer. On the first day at the Supreme Court, the atmosphere was tense, as if everything was waiting for an inevitable clash. Pam Bondi walked into the courtroom with a confident stance, her eyes blazing with determination, without a hint of hesitation. She knew she wasn't just facing an ordinary case. This was a real battle where not only justice, but also the powerful figures sitting on thrones of influence were trying to protect their dark secrets. The Supreme Court, where all the major cases are heard, witnessed a historic moment today. Pam stood before the court, prosecuting a massive real estate conglomerate that had embezzled billions of dollars from public funds. The evidence piled up, the figures were irrefutable, but it was Pam who was the deciding factor. Every word she spoke carried immense power, and she knew that not just the outcome of this case, but the very existence of the justice system itself would be decided in the hours to come. Sitting high on the bench was Judge Leonard Grayson, a man of immense power, arrogance, and danger. His eyes never left Pam, staring at her with clear disdain, as though she didn't deserve to stand before him in this room. Judge Grayson had deep, covert ties with the individuals behind the real estate empire. Every decision in the courtroom seemed to have been arranged by him beforehand, but Pam was not afraid, even though she knew this was an incredibly formidable opponent. Pam walked up to the stand without a moment's hesitation. All eyes in the room turned toward her, from the judges and lawyers to the public who had come to witness the trial. She didn't need to raise her voice or cause a stir. Every word she spoke held weight, capable of shifting not just the direction of the trial but the entire legal system. "Your Honor," Pam began, her voice calm but brimming with resolve. "This corporation has abused its power to turn billions of dollars from public funds into their personal wealth. This cannot be forgiven. This is not just an act of corruption, but a deception of the people who have placed their trust in public institutions." Judge Grayson didn't even glance at her, merely skimming through the files with an air of condescension in his voice. "So, you're implying that this entire corporation is committing a crime, Ms. Bondi? Are you sure that what you're saying isn't just baseless accusations?" Pam didn't rush to respond. She knew that Grayson wasn't an easy man to convince, but she also understood that in this fight, there was no room for weakness. "No, Your Honor," she replied coldly. "I am not making baseless accusations. I am presenting the truth you refuse to acknowledge." The courtroom fell silent. The spectators began to murmur, some of them unable to believe what they had just heard. Pam wasn't simply doing her job. She was standing up for the truth, for justice, and for those who had been deceived for years. Judge Grayson no longer wore the same arrogant expression. He remained silent for a moment, then turned to look at Pam with an unreadable gaze. But in that look, something was shifting. Perhaps he wouldn't admit it, but he was beginning to feel the undercurrents of truth. The secretive games that had allowed him to maintain power for so long were now being tested. And now, Pam Bondi, a woman brave enough to challenge all forces, was pushing everything to its limit. Pam didn't turn back to look at him. She knew exactly who she was fighting, and she understood that this battle had never been easy. But she kept moving forward. With every word, with every step, she etched one thing into the minds of everyone present in that courtroom. Justice will prevail, no matter the cost. The courtroom was like a furnace, the air heavy with tension. Every eye was fixed on Pam Bondi as she stood before Judge Leonard Grayson, who showed no interest in the evidence she had meticulously gathered. Each of Pam's steps was deliberate, but within, a brief flicker of unease passed through her. The opponent she faced wasn't just any judge. He was a man with power that could push back anyone who dared challenge him. "Ms. Bondi, I don't care about these numbers." Grayson's voice was cold, his eyes still glued to the case file, but his expression had shifted. He began to smile, a smile full of contempt, as if all her efforts meant nothing. "Who do you think you are, daring to challenge me?" His words dripped with sarcasm, sending a shiver through the crowd in the courtroom. The lawyers, the prosecutors, and the spectators could all feel the weight of the power Grayson wielded. It was undeniable dominance, a force so overwhelming that even the strongest could struggle to resist it. But Pam, with each determined step, stood her ground, unshaken. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her reaction. Silence hung in the air, tension building with every passing second. Then she spoke, her voice not loud but full of undeniable authority. "I am justice that you cannot break." Pam's words rang out like a powerful declaration, pushing back not only Grayson's taunts, but also the oppressive weight he tried to impose. The crowd could feel the change in the atmosphere, the resilience in her eyes, in each word she spoke. was like a flame lighting up souls that had long been dimmed by fear. Judge Grayson stopped smiling. He stared at her, his eyes cold, as if sizing up every word, every movement she made. It had been a long time since he'd faced an adversary with the same patience and unyielding spirit. But he wasn't ready to give up just yet. Justice, Grayson repeated, scoffing. Your justice will never stand against me, Bondi. I am the one in charge here. Pam didn't flinch. Her gaze was sharp, like a blade. Your power may sit high in this room, but it will never determine justice. She paused, letting her words sink into the minds of everyone present. And I will be the one to prove that. The entire room seemed to tremble with the tension. And in that moment, Pam knew this battle wasn't just about evidence or words. It was about who would control the narrative. Those who held power might try to twist everything, but justice would never bow down. And Pam Bondi was going to lead the charge in that fight. The room was still thick with tension. But now, it wasn't just a confrontation between Pam Bondi and Judge Grayson. Pam's words echoed in the air like a fire igniting in the darkest of nights. But suddenly, this night seemed to hold something more threatening, something deeper, something none in the room could foresee. Pam sat back at her desk, her eyes fixed on the evidence laid before her. But in that moment, her phone buzzed. A message appeared on the screen, sent from an unknown number. Without hesitation, Pam opened the message, fully trusting the moment. They will kill me if I speak. The words hit Pam like a blow to the mind. She froze, immediately standing up, her hand gripping the phone tightly, her gaze frozen for a moment in confusion and disbelief. Who was messaging her? Who could send such a warning, and why now, when she was already facing such a dangerous adversary in Grayson? She couldn't stop thinking about the message. A sense of unease began to rise within her like a roaring wave crashing against the shore. Her heart tightened. Whoever sent this knew something that Pam hadn't yet pieced together. And if that person was truly afraid for their life, this case wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It had become a fight between life and death, between exposing the truth and being silenced by powerful forces lurking in the shadows. The room seemed to fall into complete silence. Every eye in the courtroom was on Pam, but she couldn't mask the unease that flashed in her eyes. The tension wasn't only from the trial or Grayson's threats, but from something darker, something now beginning to reveal itself from the depths. These forces weren't just hidden in the shadows. They were trying to erase anyone who dared to challenge them. Pam quickly reached into her pocket, pulling out her identification badge and handing it to her assistant with a decisive look. Hold on to my phone and prepare for the worst-case scenario. Her assistant nodded quickly but didn't dare ask any questions. Pam stood and walked toward the judge's bench, a strange and unexplainable weight pressing down on her shoulders. This event was no longer just about a trial. It had become a fight for survival, and she was the only one who could uncover these secrets. But at what cost? Could she stand firm amidst the furious tides of truth? As she turned back to face Judge Grayson, he had shed the arrogance he had once worn, now eyeing her with a cautious stare. There was no longer disdain in his eyes, but something else, fear. What Pam had just experienced couldn't have been a coincidence. She knew she had touched something enormous, something dangerous. A hidden power was watching every step she took, and anyone who dug too deep would have to pay the price. Pam didn't let fear overtake her. Instead, she stepped into the light and continued her fight. But now, more than ever, she understood, this battle wasn't just about justice. It was about survival, and she would never back down. Late into the night, Pam Bondi sat quietly in her office, the faint light from the computer screen casting shadows over her tired face. Each file, each piece of evidence was meticulously reviewed, ensuring everything was ready for tomorrow's trial. She knew time was of the essence. Everything hinged on her ability to expose the individuals behind this case. These documents were the only thing that could shatter the hidden power she was up against. But just as Pam prepared for the final battle, everything suddenly collapsed before her eyes. A sense of unease gripped her as she walked to her desk, where the files were neatly arranged. But as she opened each case file, the truth hit her like a punch. Everything was gone. The reports, the key evidence, everything was missing. Pam froze, a chilling wave washing over her, as if something deeply serious had just occurred. Questions began swirling in her mind. Who did this? And why now, when everything was about to reach its most critical moment? Pam quickly grabbed her phone, dialing her trusted assistant, Jake, in a state of utter panic. But when Jake entered the room, no words of apology or explanation came from him, only the silence of guilt. Jake, we're aware of the files. Pam's voice trembled with tension. Why are they gone? Jake looked at her with fearful eyes, unwilling to meet her gaze. Pam, I had no choice, he confessed, his voice strained. What are you talking about? Pam couldn't hold back her rising voice. What did you do with them? Jake took a deep breath, his eyes filled with fear, as if trying to make himself disappear. They threatened my family, Pam. They said they'd kill my wife and my child if I didn't comply. Pam felt as if the world had been knocked out from under her. Everything around her seemed to dissolve, leaving only one question. Why? Why him? In the midst of her despair, Pam screamed, her hands clenched tightly, her eyes burning with fury as she glared at Jake. Who's behind all this? Who threatened your family? Jake stepped back, unable to answer. From the depths of his eyes, Pam saw the helplessness he couldn't hide. But she couldn't stop. Justice was still out there somewhere. But she needed to find out who was pulling the strings behind all of this. Pam turned away, not allowing her fear to cloud her focus. But deep inside, a storm was rising. These hidden forces weren't just threatening her career. They were threatening the lives of the ones she loved. A cold dread gripped her heart. Would she have the strength to continue this fight when even those closest to her could no longer be trusted? The question still lingered. Who was behind all of this? With each passing second, Pam knew that every decision she made would not only affect her life, but the survival of those around her. She couldn't turn back. This betrayal and loss wouldn't break her. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Pam Bondi would never let these criminals escape the light of justice. The air in the office seemed to stop breathing, Pam's soft breaths the only sound in the quiet of the late night. She stood in the middle of the vast room, the crucial documents now gone. A deep sense of betrayal and disappointment pierced her heart. But rather than succumb, an intense rage began to build within her. These shadowy forces hadn't just stolen her hard work. They had threatened the lives of the people she loved. But it was this very thing that sparked the fire of resilience within Pam. She couldn't stand still and watch everything crumble. With a clenched fist, she slammed it down on the desk, making the entire room tremble. The sound of wood crashing against the surface rang out like a slap, an unmistakable sign of determination that would not be broken. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Pam didn't care about maintaining her image, about relationships, or patience. This was the moment to rise up, to challenge everything corrupt that surrounded her. I won't let them win, Pam shouted, her voice strong and filled with fury, a declaration of war against those silently manipulating and hiding the truth. Every word she spoke was a promise, an unbreakable commitment to herself and to those who believed in her. She glanced at the phone on the desk, where Jake's desperate confession still echoed. She couldn't let this betrayal be the end. She couldn't allow the evil in power to dominate. Couldn't let fear defeat justice. Pam walked toward the window, her eyes still ablaze. The world outside continued to turn, but she knew this battle would never end until the truth was exposed. These dark forces thought they could break her, thought that threats and betrayal would make her quit. But they were wrong. Pam was not someone easily defeated. The storm of betrayal was closing in, but within that storm, Pam Bondi became an unquenchable flame. The fire in her eyes burned brighter than ever. No one, no force, could stop her now that she had made up her mind. Justice, truth, and unwavering determination would be her most powerful weapons in this fight. She turned back, her gaze fixed with unshakable resolve on her assistant, who stood frozen, eyes filled with tears. What are we waiting for? Pam asked, her voice no longer weak. We continue. Together, we'll defeat every one of these hidden forces. Everything had changed. This was no longer a fight between a prosecutor and the accused. This was a battle for the very survival of justice. And Pam Bondi feared nothing. She would bring every criminal into the light, no matter the cost. Her rage had been unleashed. And now, all those who betrayed her would face the storm of truth. It was late at night, but Pam Bondi couldn't bring herself to sleep. After slamming the desk, after declaring that she wouldn't let evil triumph, she sat alone in the darkness, reflecting on everything that had happened. Every decision, every step she took now seemed to lead down a narrow, treacherous path. The hidden forces she was up against didn't just have power in the courtroom. They had the ability to strike from places she could never anticipate. Pam held her phone in her hand, her eyes glued to the screen. Suddenly, a message came in, an audio file. No explanation, just an attachment. Pam didn't hesitate to open it. The first sound was a sharp gasp, followed by a cold, unmistakable voice. Judge Leonard Grayson. Take Bondi out. Grayson's words were as cold as a blade. She's too dangerous. We can't let her continue her investigation. Pam pressed stop. But as those words echoed in her ears, she felt as though she had been slapped across the face. The terror spread through her body. Take Bondi out. Those words haunted her now. Grayson, the man she had faced in the courtroom, was not just a corrupt judge. He was running a dark, underground force far more dangerous than anything she had imagined, a force that she hadn't even begun to fathom. Fear suddenly gripped her mind. Grayson didn't just want her to fail in this case. He wanted to completely annihilate her. This was no longer just a legal battle. This was a fight for survival. Pam gasped for air, her hands shaking as she held the phone. Those words, take Bondi out, were not just a threat. They were an order from a man who wielded something far more powerful than anything she could imagine. Until now, she had believed she understood the dangers, had mentally prepared herself for every challenge. But now, she realized she was facing an enemy who not only had power in the courtroom, but could control the shadows, manipulating everything from behind closed doors. Pam knew that this case had become a nightmare, and she was the only one who could end it. But to do that, she would have to confront secrets she had never imagined. Those behind Grayson weren't just ordinary criminals. They were people who could destroy anyone who dared to expose the truth. In that moment, everything changed. Pam understood that this was no longer a fight between her and Grayson. This was a battle against a system that had been manipulated, and she would have to do whatever it took to expose it. The only question left was, would she have the strength to face the ones who ordered her elimination, or would she become a victim of the very truth she was seeking? Pam lifted her head, her eyes blazing with resolve. She couldn't back down. Not now. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, and now was the time to seek vengeance, to prove that justice could not be subdued. Even if it meant facing death, she would never give up. Pam Bondi entered the courtroom holding the decisive audio recording in her hand, her final weapon. The lights in the room flickered on, but they couldn't diminish the overwhelming tension that filled the air. Everyone in the courtroom could feel the shift in atmosphere, as if something monumental, something decisive, was about to happen. Pam stood before the bench, radiating strength and unwavering focus. Your Honor, Pam's voice rang out, firm and commanding. You think you are the law, don't you? But today, I will show you what true justice looks like. The courtroom held its breath, all eyes turning toward Pam. Judge Grayson sat high on his chair, his cold gaze fixed on her. Despite his best efforts to maintain his arrogant demeanor, there was an undeniable tension in his every movement. Pam knew that this battle was not just about a case. It was a war between her and a dark force she had never expected to face, one she was now directly confronting. Pam didn't hesitate. She raised her phone and pressed play on the recording. The first sound that emerged was a sharp, hurried breath, followed by Grayson's unmistakable voice. Take Bondi out. Pam's gaze locked with Grayson's, and she couldn't hide the contempt in her eyes. The words from the recording hit like a powerful blow, exposing everything. Take Bondi out. That phrase wasn't just a threat. It was a direct order from Grayson. And now, the entire courtroom was hearing it. Grayson could feel the immediate change. Each word in the recording didn't just accuse him. It tore away the mask he had worn, revealing the dark forces he had been hiding. Fear began to spread within him. The puppeteers, the ones who thought they could conceal every truth, were now faced with the very truth Pam had brought into the light. Pam pressed on, not giving Grayson a moment to recover. You were wrong, Grayson. Her voice was resolute. You thought you could sit in that chair, manipulate justice, and eliminate anyone who dared challenge you. But today, you will see what true justice looks like. Justice that no one, no matter how powerful, can stop. Grayson, who had once sat proudly on the bench with arrogance, could no longer maintain his icy composure. He sat motionless, his eyes locked on Pam, but unable to meet her gaze. The courtroom was silent. No one dared to breathe. Pam Bondi wasn't just facing a judge. She had exposed him and all the dark forces behind him to the light, forcing them to falter. When the recording ended, the room erupted into an absolute silence. Everyone present, the prosecutors, lawyers, even the officials sitting in attendance, could hardly believe what they had just heard. Grayson, the man they had once revered as a pillar of legal power, was now laid bare before justice. Pam didn't look away. She stood there, her eyes burning with resolve, as if to challenge Grayson and all those who believed they could corrupt justice. Her final words, powerful and firm, rang out like an undeniable proclamation. Today, justice will prevail. Grayson, once a judge who thought he held absolute power, now had nothing left but silence. He knew he had been defeated. Justice had turned the tide. And in that moment, Pam Bondi wasn't just a prosecutor. She was a symbol of unwavering defiance, a woman who dared to challenge all the dark forces, no matter how powerful they were. The courtroom remained silent, but everyone understood that today they had witnessed a pivotal moment in the fight for justice. The tension in the courtroom had reached a boiling point. The recording still echoed in the air like a declaration of war, exposing the dark secrets Grayson had desperately tried to hide for so long. But that was not all. Pam Bondi stood there, her eyes never leaving Judge Leonard Grayson, who remained seated on his high chair, struggling to maintain his cold demeanor, yet unable to conceal the tremors spreading through his body. The truth had begun to unravel, and now Pam was ready to push everything to its emotional climax. The light in the courtroom seemed to dim, and the crowd began to feel a heavy, oppressive atmosphere, as if a storm was about to crash down. Pam wasn't just revealing Grayson's corruption. She had seized irrefutable evidence, proof so damning that even someone as arrogant as Grayson couldn't escape it. "Your Honor, you're not just corrupt," Pam's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, each word falling from her lips without fear. "You are involved in the deaths of dozens of witnesses I've investigated." Her words struck like a thunderbolt, sending shock waves through the room. The crowd began to murmur, and those sitting closest could feel the confusion and horror spreading in the air. The witnesses Grayson had silenced to protect his secrets were now being exposed. The people he had killed, the cases he had hidden, everything was now laid bare for all to see. The people in the room started shouting in outrage, a flood of anger rising that could not be contained. Those in power, who once seemed untouchable, were now confronted with the wrath of justice. Lawyers, court staff, the public, everyone felt shaken as this truth came crashing down upon them. At that moment, Grayson could no longer maintain his composure. His face drained of color, his lips pressed tightly together, and his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. He couldn't defend himself. He couldn't refute it. Everything was crystal clear now. Pam stared at Grayson without hesitation. Her gaze burned with resolve, reflecting her unwavering determination. She had faced every challenge, and now she would not let this criminal slip through the cracks of justice. She moved toward the bench, never breaking eye contact with Grayson, making sure he couldn't avoid her gaze. "You're done." Pam's words were cold but full of fury. It wasn't just a statement, it was a verdict. These words weren't just about Grayson. They were about all the hidden forces manipulating society behind the scenes. Pam wasn't just seeking justice for him. She wanted the truth exposed, justice to be served, and she knew that no one would stop her in her pursuit of it. Grayson could no longer hold on to his facade of arrogance. He began to sweat, his hands gripping the chair as if trying to maintain some semblance of control. But deep inside, he knew he couldn't escape it. Pam was too strong, and the truth had become undeniable. Grayson's true face had been exposed, and now he could no longer stand tall. The eyes of the angry crowd, the piercing gazes of Pam, all of them converged on him like a sharp blade descending with every passing second. Pam had no more words to add. The truth had been proven. Justice would never lose. And with her resilience, her unshakable resolve, Grayson and those like him would have to pay for the crimes they had committed. She knew this was just the beginning, but she also knew she would never back down in this fight. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, a heavy silence enveloping the space. with only the desperate gasps of Judge Leonard Grayson breaking the stillness. He sat frozen in his chair, his face pale, his hands gripping the armrest as if trying to find an escape. But now it was too late. Every truth had been revealed. Every mask had been torn away. Grayson had no place left to hide, no chance to defend himself. Suddenly, he slammed his fist onto the desk, shouting in desperation, "You'll pay for this." His voice was filled with hatred, a terrifying threat laced with fury. Grayson's gaze locked onto Pam as if he wanted to burn her with his stare. He tried to reignite the fear within her, but Pam did not flinch. Pam stood tall, showing no sign of fear. She gave a gentle smile, but in that smile was satisfaction and unwavering faith in justice, faith in herself. The recording, the exposure of all the secrets, and Grayson's words could not shake her resolve. Every step she took, every word she spoke, was a sharp counterattack, leaving her opponent with no room to retreat. "You don't understand, Grayson," Pam replied softly, but every word she spoke carried an invisible power. "Justice will always prevail, and today you've seen that." The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, but a strange feeling began to spread throughout the room. Everyone present began to realize that nothing could stop Pam now. The crowd started to murmur, those seated in the room exhaling in relief. The feeling that justice was on the verge of winning was palpable, spreading through the air. Pam Bondi was no longer just a prosecutor. In this moment, she had become a symbol of resilience and justice. Grayson sat frozen, his eyes drowning in fear and helplessness. Everything had spiraled beyond his control. He could no longer convince anyone, could do nothing to reverse the situation. Criminals like Grayson may have created their power games, but they couldn't win against the truth. And that was what Pam had proven. She hadn't just defeated him in a legal battle. She had defeated the evil, the corruption, and the hidden forces he represented. Pam stood there, no arrogance, no sense of triumph, but inside, a sense of fulfillment rose, knowing that she had done what was right, that she had fought for justice. Justice had begun to prevail, and she would not stop until all the corruption, crime, and deception were exposed to the light. Everything Pam Bondi had built, the victories, the resilience she had shown in the courtroom, now faced a greater challenge than ever before. Everything started to unravel as rumors began to spread through political circles and the media. In a battle where the truth is often obscured, her enemies had found a way to exploit a deep crack in Pam's past, a secret she had worked tirelessly to conceal. Just when Pam thought she was on the verge of her final victory, an old video suddenly appeared on social media and news outlets. The video, grainy and dated, was clear enough to make viewers recoil. It captured Pam shaking hands with Robert Darnell, a politician infamous for his deep ties to corruption. The handshake wasn't just a casual greeting. It carried an unspoken understanding in their eyes, a clear indication of a relationship that went far beyond what Pam had ever admitted. The video spread like wildfire. News outlets, interview programs, and mainstream media were quick to air the footage. Speculation ran rampant. Was this proof that Pam Bondi had compromised with corruption to rise to power? Had she once been part of the dark power network she was now trying to fight? The public began to question. The rumors and accusations grew louder. In a society where trust in politics and the legal system had already eroded, the emergence of this video was like a powerful blow to the public's confidence. Questions flooded social media. Is Pam really innocent? Did she sell her soul to gain her position? Pam Bondi, the woman who had stood firm in every legal battle, was now at the center of a relentless assault on her honor. Not only was she facing betrayal from within and shadowy forces trying to take her down, but now the secrets of her past were being dredged up, threatening to destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. Under the overwhelming pressure, Pam did not retreat. But there was no denying that in this moment, a strange fear stirred inside her. Had the decisions she made in the past, even if necessary to survive in a system so deeply corrupted, now caused her to lose the very integrity she had fought so hard to protect? Those who were against her would no longer just rely on justice to win. They would dig into her past and use her own mistakes and choices against her. Pam felt the undercurrent of anger from the crowd, the skeptical gazes from everyone around her. But she couldn't stop. This was the moment she had to face her past, confront herself, and decide if she could stand firm in this battle. Pam Bondi sat alone in her office, the dim light from the desk lamp casting shadows across her face, highlighting the wrinkles of worry that had begun to mark her features. Her heart raced in her chest, as if each passing second was tied to questions she couldn't answer. The video, the rumors of her alleged compromise with a corrupt politician, had opened up a deep crack within her, one that Pam couldn't ignore. Had she ever done the right thing? Or were all her actions, sacrifices, and choices in the past just betrayals of herself and the ideals she once believed in? Her hands trembled as she looked at the papers on her desk, documents that proved her integrity, the evidence she had fought so hard to protect. What did I do to protect what's right? She sighed, a sense of guilt enveloping her mind. Her past, the decisions she had made to survive in a world filled with power and corruption, now haunted her. How could she continue fighting when she wasn't even sure about those choices anymore? Pam stood up, her hands still shaking. But she couldn't sit still any longer. The storm inside her only grew stronger, and she knew there was only one way to free herself from this feeling. She had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The truth, that was the only remaining driving force inside her. No one could speak for her about what she had done. No one could judge her for the decisions she had made in the past. Pam Bondi was the one who would decide the path she would take, and no one could take that right away from her. She looked into the mirror across the room, and this time, there was no doubt in her eyes. She would prove the truth. That was her declaration to herself, a promise not only to others, but also to her own soul. Pam Bondi was not a failure. She would stand strong, continue to fight, no matter how powerful her enemies were. Every betrayal, every doubt would not make her falter. The inner conflict slowly gave way to an unbreakable resolve. There would be no more fear, no more hesitation. She would uncover the truth, not only for herself, but for everyone who had trusted her. And as she walked out of the room, one thing filled her mind: victory. Justice would prevail, and no one could stop her. Pam Bondi was no longer a person torn between the past and the present. She had made her decision, and from this moment on, she would follow through, never looking back. The entire city was watching, every eye glued to the TV screen as Pam Bondi stood before the crowd at a crucial press conference. After everything that had transpired, the threats, the rumors, and the secrets dug up from her past, Pam knew this was the defining moment. This was her time to stand up and speak the truth. No matter what others thought, she wasn't just fighting to protect her career. She was fighting to defend her honor and the ideals she had upheld throughout her journey. As the light shone down on her face, Pam could feel the tension in every cell of her body. The storm within her hadn't subsided, but now, instead of being swept away by it, she had learned how to control it. She grasped the microphone, her hand trembling, but her voice unwavering and strong. "I'm not perfect," Pam began, her voice choked with emotion. But the determination in every word was as powerful as a wave. "I've made mistakes, but I've never betrayed justice." The room fell silent, and those present, journalists, ordinary citizens, all could feel the sincerity in every syllable. Pam Bondi was opening up, confronting the darkest parts of her past. But instead of crumbling, she was standing tall. Instead of allowing her past mistakes to bury her, she was using them as fuel to continue fighting. "I never chose the easy path," she continued, her gaze sharp, meeting the camera head-on. "Every decision I have made has been carefully thought out because I believe in justice, in what is right. I may not be perfect, but I will never bow to corruption." Her words echoed in the room, touching the hearts of those watching. The crowd began to stir, whispers rising. Pam wasn't perfect. She had her flaws, her past mistakes, but it was precisely those imperfections that made her more relatable than ever. She didn't hide from her shortcomings. And in that moment, her openness made her a powerful symbol of resilience. She knew there would always be critics. There would always be doubt. But the truth was that she had stood firm through every challenge, and that, no matter what, was the most important thing. Pam wasn't just facing criminals. She was confronting her own weaknesses and overcoming them. "Justice will always prevail, no matter the cost," Pam declared, her voice full of strength and certainty. "I will not let anyone, use corruption to conceal the truth." The press conference was not just a declaration of war against those who opposed her. It was a declaration to herself. She had overcome difficulties, had faced the trials head-on, and now she was ready to continue, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. The crowd began to clap, not because she was perfect, but because they saw in Pam the truth, the strength, and the unwavering honesty that could not be shaken. The audience began to empathize with Pam, sensing her struggle not just for justice, but for herself. She had fought, and she would continue to fight. And in that moment, all the doubts, all the criticism could not break her resolve. Pam Bondi stood there, unyielding, resolute, and with every word she spoke, she was rewriting her own story, a story with no room for fear, only for the ultimate victory of justice. The atmosphere in the Supreme Court today seemed to thicken with tension, as if the very air was charged with anticipation. Every eye in the room was fixed on Pam Bondi, the woman who had faced countless storms. But today, she stood here with the final evidence that could end it all. Pam had brought more than just accusations, more than just battles fought over time. She had gathered undeniable proof that could defeat Judge Leonard Grayson and the corrupt real estate empire he had been protecting. Grayson, once the one who held power in this courtroom, sat there, his face stern but unable to hide the tension in his body. He had once believed he was invincible, that the dark schemes he had orchestrated would forever remain concealed. But today, Pam had prepared a final blow he couldn't escape. Once again, she stood before the bench, holding a small notebook in her hand. But within that notebook lay everything Grayson had done to protect his dirty dealings. The numbers, the names, the illicit funds he had hidden, all of it was recorded within its pages. Pam opened the notebook, her gaze never leaving Grayson. She knew he could feel the threat clearly now. She was no longer just a prosecutor. She was the one who would bring an end to everything he had done, the one who would expose the crimes he thought would remain hidden forever. Your Honor, Pam began, her voice steady and confident. Today, I present the final evidence, a notebook documenting every transaction you've made, every deal you've concealed, transactions that could never be justified. She flipped through the pages of the notebook, each number, every trace of corruption clearly listed. Each transaction was another step in the dirty plan Grayson and those behind him had executed. The names, the projects, the illegal payments. Every detail was recorded in this notebook. Pam went through each page slowly, allowing the silence in the courtroom to become the confirmation of every word she spoke. Each word Pam uttered, every piece of evidence she presented, was a fatal blow to Grayson. As she spoke, Grayson began to show signs of panic. At first, he tried to maintain his composure, but as he looked at the evidence, the anxiety in his eyes was unmistakable. Page after page turned, and every step Pam took brought him closer to the wall. Then, when Pam reached the final part of the notebook, Grayson couldn't sit still anymore. He slammed his hand down on the desk, shouting in desperation, "No way!" His voice rang out in the courtroom, but no one felt sympathy. Everyone recognized that this was a defeated man, someone who could no longer escape. The courtroom shook with the sound of a scream from someone who had once been the center of power, but now he had been fully exposed. The crowd in the courtroom began to rise, anger surging from every corner. Those present no longer had any doubt. Grayson was the one behind it all, and his words, his actions, were now exposed to the light. Pam locked eyes with Grayson, her gaze unwavering. "You're defeated, Grayson," she said, her voice unwavering, fearless. "Justice has won, and you will pay for what you've done." With every word Pam spoke, a sense of satisfaction rose within her. At last, she had turned the tables, cornering the villain in a way he couldn't escape. Those who thought power would protect them, those who used money and influence to cover up their crimes, now had to face the undeniable truth. The crowd began to clap, a powerful sense of empathy with Pam's relentless fight. They saw her not just as a prosecutor, but as a symbol of defiance and justice. As for Grayson, he was left with nothing but despair, unable to do anything but acknowledge his own defeat. The courtroom fell into an eerie silence, the tension thick enough to cut through the air, only the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. The bright lights cast harsh shadows on the face of Judge Leonard Grayson, who no longer wore his once proud, cold demeanor. His eyes were now filled with fear, desperation. Everything had collapsed, and there was no escape. Pam Bondi stood firm at the bench, her gaze never leaving Grayson, her stare cold but resolute. This was more than just a legal victory. It was the unmasking of a corrupt system that had existed for far too long. The entire courtroom seemed frozen in time, everyone intently watching. Then, like a storm crashing in, federal agents stormed the room without warning. Grayson didn't have time to react. 2 agents swiftly moved in, and in an instant, they cuffed him right where he sat, right in the very judge's seat he had occupied for so many years. The sight was almost unbelievable. A man who had once held supreme power in this very courtroom was now being taken away like a common criminal. Grayson trembled, his terrified gaze locked onto Pam Bondi, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. All of his confidence, all of his schemes, had evaporated into thin air. As the agents dragged him from the room, Grayson continued to thrash about, desperately trying to cling to the power he once held. But no one in the courtroom was listening to his cries for mercy. What he now faced was not forgiveness but punishment. Evil could not escape justice. Pam stood still, unshaken, her head held high. There was no sense of triumph, but there was a clear understanding. She had done the right thing. Justice had prevailed, and a man as corrupt and powerful as Grayson had been defeated. As Grayson was hauled out of the courtroom, the silence that had hung heavy in the air was torn apart by the sound of applause from the crowd. The clapping wasn't just for the conclusion of a case. It was the satisfaction of seeing evil finally pay the price for its actions. A man who once held all the power, who thought he could manipulate everything, was now brought down. Every eye in the room turned not just to Grayson but also to Pam Bondi, the woman who had stood strong throughout this battle. Yet, despite the continuing applause, a lingering sense of unease remained. Was it really over? Even though Grayson had been arrested, and justice had been served, deep down, Pam knew there was a bigger question haunting her mind. Had the system of corruption he represented truly been eradicated? Were there still shadows lurking, waiting to rise again? Pam stood there, amidst the satisfaction of justice, but also with annoying worry about what might happen next. No matter what, she knew she had done the right thing, and she had won this battle. But the war against corruption, against the hidden forces, it was far from over. The satisfaction of seeing Grayson dragged away was undeniable. But in her heart, Pam still carried a sense of unease. Justice had won today, but the fight could be much longer than she had anticipated. However, whatever came next, Pam Bondi would stand strong, resilient, and unyielding with every step she took forward. Pam Bondi stepped out of the courthouse, her heart racing but her gaze calm, more resolute than ever. After all the storms, all the trials, she had overcome them all. The victory was not just hers, but for everyone who believed in justice and truth. She walked through the crowd, whose applause resounded like waves crashing against the shore. People stood there, viewing her as a symbol of defiance and justice. She took a deep breath, standing strong before the sea of people, and spoke with unwavering determination. Justice never dies as long as someone dares to stand up. Her words reverberated through the space, filling the hearts of all present with faith and hope. Pam Bondi had not only won in a courtroom, she had delivered a powerful message to everyone. Justice will never be suppressed. No matter how many criminals one must face, as long as someone stands up, the truth will always prevail. The audience in the courtroom, those who had witnessed her long and difficult journey, couldn't help but feel the tenacity within her. Pam was no longer just a prosecutor. She was a living testament to the strength of justice, a role model for anyone brave enough to fight for what is right, no matter the cost. When Pam arrived home, the dim lights illuminated the quiet room. She sat at her desk, her hands gently caressing the remaining paperwork from the trial. But when she opened an envelope that had not been touched for a long time, an anonymous letter appeared, and its chilling threat made her frown. "You won't be at peace, Bondi." Threats were nothing new to Pam. She had faced unimaginable challenges throughout this journey. The defeated, though she had exposed them, still tried to sow fear. But Pam wasn't afraid. She smiled, a calm smile that hid her unwavering resilience. "Don't try me," she whispered to herself. Pam tossed the letter aside without a second thought. The horror was not hers, but that of the one who dared threaten her. The villains were now the ones trembling before her indomitable strength. Pam had won, but she knew this path would never be easy. Still, she was ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. As Pam stepped out the door, a large screen in the square displayed the final message. No one stands above the law. Do you dare to fight? The onlookers gazed at the screen, their hearts filled with anger at the injustice and satisfaction with Pam's victory. Yet, no one could shake the feeling of suspense, as if this story was far from over. They knew this was only one chapter in the larger battle, and the remaining question was, who would follow in Pam Bondi's footsteps in this fight? Pam stood there, saying nothing more. All she needed was for others to see her as an example. The oppressors would not win because justice would always stand firm, and the fight would continue. The story was never finished, and everyone knew that what Pam had started would not end anytime soon. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of justice, resilience, and the fight against corruption. Pam Bondi's story is a powerful reminder that no matter how daunting the obstacles, truth and justice will always find a way to prevail. If you found inspiration in this story, please don't forget to like, comment, and share. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Emotional Journey for more emotional and impactful stories that will ignite your passion for justice and inspire you to stand up for what's right. Stay strong, stay inspired, and always believe in the power of truth. Thank you again for being part of this journey.